And as we saw in Tina's report, 2011 was a huge year for international news. So this morning, we're taking a look ahead to the headlines we might see in 2012. For more, we're joined by CBS News Foreign Affairs analyst Pam Falk. Pam, thanks so much for being here. Good to see you.
It's good to be here, Whit.
You mentioned that in 2012, nuclear concerns could once again take center stage. And when you're saying that, you're really talking about Iran and North Korea, correct?
Precisely. And those are the two countries, opaque as it is, that we worry about. And one of it, of course, Iran has defied UN sanctions. And part of the problem is they're also threatening to close the Straits of Hormuz. There's a lot of questions about oil. And the situation has gotten worse. Now, North Korea, we obviously know, with the death of Kim Jong-il,
undergoing a huge transition right now.
Huge transition. And even though there were a lot of fears in anticipation of that transition that Kim Jong-un, who's so young, might have to show his stripes in a military way, the real issue was that you're starting to see with the funeral, which starts today, that they invited the South Koreans. They even invite some of the widows of the people that were killed in the attack by North Korea against South Korean vessel. So it may very well be a moment of opportunity for North Korea. On the other hand, they are a nuclear power, and they have tested this nuclear weapons and underground testing missiles on a regular basis.
Let's go back to Iran for a second. Recently, Defense Secretary Leon Panetta, in an interview with our Scott Pelley, said that the U.S. will not, under any circumstances, allow Iran to have a nuclear weapon and would be willing to go as far as military action if necessary to prevent that from happening. Do you see in the near future the United States having to make a really tough decision with regards to Iran and its nuclear program?
Well, the hope is that that doesn't happen, because Iran is not other countries such as Syria, where the Israelis did attack a nuclear facility when they were developing nuclear weapons. Iran has a much bigger military. It's a much larger entity to deal with. And so the hope would be that UN sanctions, international sanctions, the European Union have put more on. And the real question is, do you go to sanctions on the central bank? Do you sanction oil? In other words, an oil embargo. And that is the question of, does it hit the people? Does it also hit the United States and Europe? So those are all things that you have to think about. But there have been a lot of other things going on. There's been a lot of sabotage against Iranian nuclear plants from computer viruses. And so they may be slowed down in their pursuit.
What's the latest timeline? Iran having a nuclear weapon?
1 year, 3 years?
1 year, 3 years. So, this is the near future.
Look,
the next
the biggest
president.
issue is the threat to Israel. And when you look at the neighborhood, all of these wonderful sweeping protest movements that have led to revolutions that captivated the world, punctuated by the Euro crisis, have changed the neighborhood for Israel. And so recently Egypt, even the Islamic leaders in Egypt and the Islamic Brotherhood have said, the Muslim Brotherhood have said specifically, they may accept the Camp David Accords. Egypt, with so much change, all of Israel's neighbors are changing, and that puts Israel in a great deal of threat, especially since all the comments that Iran has said against
Obviously
Israel.
changed throughout the region. I want to shift gears to Afghanistan and Pakistan, and specifically the U.S. relationship with Pakistan right now, which is really at an all-time low.
Precisely.
Where does that relationship go from here? How does it affect the war effort in Afghanistan?
Well, as it stands, first you have this one other major international event that Tina Krause did mention, and that is the killing of Osama bin Laden. That put closure on the tragedy of 9/11, and it also put a little distance between Pakistan and the United States, because they felt they should have been forewarned. On the other hand, there were allegations, and there's still some evidence of members of Pakistani intelligence knowing that Osama bin Laden was there. And that investigation actually is going on right now to see what happened. And then, of course, recently there was a friendly fire incident that killed many Pakistanis.
In that border region.
In the border region. And really, so that has soured relations. They've closed some of the access points.
And there are some specific issues, and this is the one that the U.S. has really been going after Pakistan on. The fact that they go after some extremists, but they harbor others within its borders, specifically the Haqqani network, which is proven to be deadly, and going over the Afghan border and attacking U.S. troops.
Now, what you need is, I totally understand, and the issue is you've got to deal with Pakistan as it is. They have their own memo gate, they call it. There's an issue with the prime minister about corruption, about assassination possibilities, all sorts of things.
And that between the government and military rule within the country.
Precisely. And so, but their argument, and I spoke to the Pakistani UN ambassador recently, their argument is that the United States trained the Haqqani network to some extent. Some of the Haqqani family were in the Reagan White House visiting, and so because there was a different war going on. And so part of it, their view is it's everyone's problem, that there's a Pakistan Taliban, there's the Haqqani, help us fight the problem. And I think on that sense, they have a legitimate reason to want more help from the United States rather than the kind of antagonism we've seen. And so it may take a lot of extra diplomacy to get that back on track.
Let's broaden out a little bit. The entire region, the Middle East, North Africa, obviously huge transitions going on in Libya, in Yemen, Syria, Egypt. What's your assessment, if you can kind of lump all of those countries together, and it's tough to do, but there's been an uprising in each place. What's your assessment of what we can expect in 2012 there? In
2012, in the Arab Spring area, I think you're going to still see some fits and starts and some countries that aren't making it so easy to change governments for a democracy. So Syria is still killing its people, even though observers arrived to try to stop that from the Arab League. In Yemen, you still see a back and forth with the president whether he'll actually go, and same with Bahrain. And so I think it's not going to be quite as easy. Also, the UN did pass the no-fly zone and enable the United States to go in with NATO and with other countries and really lead from behind. NATO went first in Libya. But the Russians and the Chinese don't want any part of it anymore. They say the U.S. and France and the other NATO countries really overplayed the mandate of the UN.
So the Arab Spring really not over yet, perhaps a second wave in the next year. Quickly, I want to move on to what's your take? What's that story that's out there that we didn't pay much attention to in 2011, but really could make headlines in 2012?
Well, I think the headline of all of this, before we even go to that, is that the world is a less violent place. If you look at the 65 years past, there are less people dying in wars, and it looks turbulent. But that's important to know, and that the UN has been more involved, and there's more of a divide between the rich and poor. And I think that's important to see. It's not all dismal. Now, what areas we haven't looked at are the drug areas. And I think that's been left out of a lot of the 2011 reviews.
Haven't really heard about the drug war in the last decade.
Right. The UN had a global drug report that really looked pretty bad, that different drugs, some drugs are down and some drugs are up, but the crime related to drugs, especially in Central South America, Mexico, all of that is spilling into the United States, and we see it every day, and that's partly because we've neglected it. It hasn't been a flashpoint. So that's one. Sub-Saharan Africa may see some more changes and unrest, and I think what you're generally going to see is more problems in the Middle East because of the Israel-Palestine confrontation that hasn't been resolved.
All right, fascinating stuff. Pam Falk, CBS News Foreign Affairs Analyst. Thanks so much.
Absolutely, Wade. Good to be here.